Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind troubled with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve while rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Let my voice wash over you at a comfortable volume and allow yourself to be distracted from the stresses and worries that play on your mind. Whether you need help falling asleep or going back to sleep in the middle of the night, you can trust me to keep you company and help you to wake up tomorrow in a rested state. You may need to try out Sleepy Time Tales for a few nights to get used to this slightly strange idea, but I believe it will be well worth your while. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So settle down, relax, and allow yourself to get lost in my telling of tonight's story. Before we get to tonight's reading, I'd like to ask for a few minutes of your time. Sleepy Time Tales is a listener-supported podcast. I can only keep it going, paying for the services and tools I use, and justify the time that I use on it thanks to the generosity and support of listeners just like you. So if you're finding Sleepy Time Tales useful, if it helps you to get a restful night, and you would like to keep it going out to thousands of your fellow insomniacs, please consider supporting on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is monthly support that not only helps me keep the lights on, but can also get you bonuses based on your contribution level. I have had a little bit of a drop-off of support in the last couple of months, so now would be a great time to join up if you have been thinking about it. And if monthly seems like a big ask, you can make once-off tips to the tip jar on the website. You can also support Sleepy Time Tales without having to do so financially, by just telling about it. If you know someone who's struggling to sleep or someone's complaining, just tell them where to find it and see how it goes from there. And that's enough of that. Let's move on to tonight's reading, which is the traditional Life and Adventures of Santa Claus by L. Frank Baum. But I finished that very early and switched to some short stories from the Pearl storybook, to finish off with a little bit of extra Christmas flavor. Thank you very much. Let's get to it. It's almost Christmas time, so we return once again to the Life and Adventures of Santa Claus by L. Frank Baum. When the world grew old. The next morning, when Santa Claus opened his eyes and gazed around the familiar room, which he had feared he might never see again, he was astonished to find his old strength renewed, and to feel the red blood of perfect health coursing through his veins. He sprang from his bed and stood where bright sunshine came in through the window, and flooded him with its merry, dancing rays. He did not then understand what had happened to restore to him the vigor of youth, but in spite of the fact that his beard remained the color of snow, and that wrinkles still lingered in the corners of his bright eyes, old Santa Claus felt as brisk and merry as a boy of 16, and was soon whistling contentedly as he busied himself fashioning new toys. Then Uck came to him, and told of the mantle of immortality, and how Claus had won it through his love for little children. It made old Santa look grave for a moment to think he had been so favored, but it also made him glad to realize that now he need never fear being parted from his dear ones. At once he began preparations for making a remarkable assortment of pretty and amusing playthings, and in larger quantities than ever before. For now that he might always devote himself to this work, he decided that no child in the world, poor or rich, should hereafter go without a Christmas gift, if he could manage to supply it. The world was new in the days when dear old Santa Claus first began toy-making, and won, by his loving deeds, the mantle of immortality. and the task of supplying cheering words, sympathy, and pretty playthings to all the young of his race did not seem a difficult undertaking at all. But every year, more and more children were born into the world, and these, when they grew up, began spreading slowly over all the face of the earth, seeking new homes, so that Santa Claus found each year that his journeys must extend farther and farther from the Laughing Valley, and that the packs of toys must be made larger and ever larger. So at length he took counsel with his fellow immortals how his work might keep pace with the increasing number of children, that none might be neglected. And the immortals were so greatly interested in his labours that they gladly rendered him their assistance. Uck gave his man Kilter, the silent and swift, and the Knook prince gave him Peter, who was more crooked and less surly than any of his brothers. And the Roll prince gave him Neuter, the sweetest-tempered Roll ever known, and the Fairy Queen gave him Whisk, the tiny, mischievous, but lovable fairy who knows today almost as many children as does Santa Claus himself. With these people to help make the toys and to keep his house in order and to look after the sledge and the harness, Santa Claus found it much easier to prepare his yearly load of gifts, and his days began to follow one another more smoothly and pleasantly. Yet after a few generations his worries were renewed, for it was remarkable how the number of people continued to grow, and how many more children there were every year to be served. When the people filled all the cities and lands of one country, they wandered into another part of the world, and the men cut down the trees in many of the great forests that had been ruled by Uck, and with the wood they built new cities, and where the forests had been were fields of grain and herds of browsing cattle. You might think the master woodsman would rebel at the loss of his forests, but not so. The wisdom of Uck was mighty and far-seeing. The world was made for men, said he to Santa Claus, and I have but guarded the forests until men needed them for their use. I am glad my strong trees can furnish shelter for men's weak bodies and warm them through the cold winters. But I hope they will not cut down all the trees, for mankind needs the shelter of the woods in summer as much as the warmth of blazing logs in winter. And however crowded the world may grow, I do not think men will ever come to Bursey, nor to the great black forest, nor to the wooded wilderness of Braz, unless they seek their shades for pleasure and not to destroy the giant trees. By and by, people made ships from the tree trunks and crossed over oceans and built cities in far lands. But the oceans made little difference to the journeys of Santa Claus. His reindeer sped over the waters as swiftly as over land, and his sledge headed from east to west and followed in the wake of the sun. So that as the earth rolled slowly over Santa Claus and all of the 24 hours to encircle it each Christmas day, and the speedy reindeer enjoyed these wonderful journeys more and more. So year after year, and generation after generation, and century after century, the world grew older, and the people became more numerous, and the labors of Santa Claus steadily increased. The fame of his good deeds spread to every household where children dwelt, and all the little ones loved him dearly, and the fathers and mothers honored him for the happiness he had given them when they too were young. And the aged grandsires and granddames remembered him with tender gratitude and blessed his name. The deputies of Santa Claus. However, there was one evil following in the path of civilization that caused Santa Claus a vast amount of trouble before he discovered a way to overcome it. But fortunately, it was the last trial he was forced to undergo. One Christmas Eve, when his reindeer had leapt to the top of a new building, Santa Claus was surprised to find that the chimney had been built much smaller than usual. But he had no time to think about it just then, so he drew in his breath and made himself as small as possible and slid down the chimney. I ought to be at the bottom by this time, he thought, as he continued to slip downward. But no fireplace of any sort met his view, and by he reached the very end of the chimney, which was in the cellar. This is odd, he reflected, much puzzled by the experience. If there is no fireplace, what on earth is the chimney good for? Then he began to climb out again and found it hard work, the space being so small. And on his way up he noticed a thin round pipe sticking through the side of the chimney, but could not guess what it was for. Finally he reached the roof and said to the reindeer, "There was no need of my going down that chimney, for I could find no fireplace through which to enter the house. I fear the children who live there must go without playthings this Christmas." Then he drove on, but soon came to another new house with a small chimney. This caused Santa Claus to shake his head doubtfully, but he tried the chimney nevertheless and found it exactly like the other. Moreover, he nearly stuck fast in the narrow flue and tore his jacket trying to get out again. So although he came to several such chimneys that night, he did not venture to descend any more of them. "What in the world are people thinking of to build such useless chimneys?" he exclaimed. "In all the years I have travelled with my reindeer, I have never seen the like before." True enough, but Santa Claus had not then discovered that stoves had been invented and were fast coming into use. When he did find it out, he wondered how the builders of these houses could have so little consideration for him, when they knew very well it was his custom to climb down chimneys and enter houses by way of the fireplaces. Perhaps the men who built these houses had outgrown their love for toys, and were indifferent whether Santa Claus called on their children or not. Whatever the explanation might be, the poor children were forced to bear the burden of grief and disappointment. The following year, Santa Claus found more and more of the new-fashioned chimneys that had no fireplaces, and the next year still more. The third year, so numerous had the narrow chimneys become, he even had a few toys left in his sledge that he was unable to give away because he could not get to the children. The matter had now become so serious that it worried the good man greatly, and he decided to talk it over with Kilter and Peter and Neuter and Whisk. Kilter already knew something about it, for it had been his duty to run around to all the houses just before Christmas and gather up the notes and letters to Santa Claus that the children had written, telling what they wished put in their stockings or hung on the Christmas trees. But Kilter was a silent fellow and seldom spoke of what he saw in the cities and villages. The others were very indignant. "These people act as if they do not wish their children to be made happy," said sensible Peter in a vexed tone. "The idea of shutting out such a generous friend to their little ones." "But it is my intention to make children happy whether their parents wish it or not," returned Santa Claus. "Years ago, when I first began making toys, children were even more neglected by their parents than they are now. So I've learned to pay no attention to thoughtless or selfish parents, but to consider only the longings of childhood." "You are right, my master," said Neuter the Roll. "Many children would lack a friend if you did not consider them and try to make them happy." "Then," declared the laughing Whisk, "we must abandon any thought of these new-fashioned chimneys, but become burglars and break into the houses some other way." "What way?" asked Santa Claus. "Why, walls of brick, wood, and plaster are nothing to fairies. I can easily pass through them whenever I wish, and so can Peter and Neuter and Kilter. Is that not so, comrades?" "I often pass through the walls when I gather up the letters," said Kilter. And that was a long speech for him, and so surprised Peter and Neuter that their big round eyes nearly popped out of their heads. "Therefore," continued the fairy, "you may as well take us with you on your next journey, and when we come to one of these houses with stoves instead of fireplaces, We will distribute the toys to the children without the need of using a chimney." "That seems to me a good plan," replied Santa Claus, well pleased at having solved the problem. "We will try it next year." That was how the fairy, the pixie, the knook, and the roll all rode in the sledge with their master the following Christmas Eve. And they had no trouble at all in entering the new-fashioned houses and leaving toys for the children that lived in them. And their deft services not only relieved Santa Claus of much labor, but enabled him to complete his work more quickly than usual, so that the merry party found themselves at home with an empty sledge a full hour before daybreak. The only drawback to the journey was that the mischievous Whisk persisted in tickling the reindeer with a long feather to see them jump, and Santa Claus found it necessary to watch him every minute and to tweak his long ears once or twice to make him behave himself. But taken all together, the trip was a great success, and to this day the four little folk always accompany Santa Claus on his yearly ride and help him with the distribution of his gifts. But the indifference of parents which had so annoyed the good saint did not continue very long, and Santa Claus soon found they were really anxious he should visit their homes on Christmas Eve and leave presents for their children. So to lighten his task, which was fast becoming very difficult indeed, old Santa decided to ask the parents to assist him. "Get your Christmas trees all ready for my coming," he said to them, "and then I shall be able to leave the presents without loss of time, and you can put them on the trees when I am gone." And to others he said, "See that the children's stockings are hung up in readiness for my coming, and I can fill them as quick as a wink." And often, when parents were kind and good-natured, Santa Claus would simply fling down his package of gifts and leave the fathers and mothers to fill the stockings after he had darted away in his sledge. "I will make all loving parents my deputies," cried the jolly old fellow, "and they shall help me do my work. For in this way I shall save many precious minutes, and few children will be neglected for lack of time to visit them." Besides carrying around the big packs in his swift-flying sledge, old Santa began to send great heaps of toys to the toy shops, so that if parents wanted larger supplies for their children, they could easily get them. And if any children were, by chance, missed by Santa Claus on his yearly rounds, they could go to the toy shops and get enough to make them happy and contented. For the loving friend of the little ones decided that no child, if he could help it, should long for toys in vain. And the toy shops also proved convenient, for whenever a child fell ill and needed a new toy to amuse it, and sometimes on birthdays, the fathers and mothers go to the toy shops and get pretty gifts for their children in honor of the happy event. Perhaps you will now understand how, in spite of the bigness of the world, Santa Claus is able to supply all the children with beautiful gifts. To be sure, the old gentleman is rarely seen in these days, but it is not because he tries to keep out of sight, I assure you. Santa Claus is the same loving friend of children that in the old days used to play and romp with them by the hour, and I know he would love to do the same now if he had the time. But you see, he is so busy all the year making toys, and so hurried on that one night when he visits our homes with his packs, that he comes and goes among us like a flash, and is almost impossible to catch a glimpse of him. And although there are millions and millions more children in the world than there used to be, Santa Claus has never been known to complain of their increasing numbers. The more the merrier, he cries, with his jolly laugh, and the only difference to him is the fact that his little workmen have to make their busy fingers fly faster every year to satisfy the demands of so many little ones. In all this world there is nothing so beautiful as a happy child, says good old Santa Claus. And if he had his way, the children would all be beautiful, for all would be happy. And that is the end of The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus by L. Frank Baum. And because we reached the end of that much quicker than I expected, and there's a little bit of time left to go, I've got a selection of readings from the Pearl Storybook. Stories and Legends of Winter, Christmas, and New Year's Day coming up. A Christmas Song. Everywhere, everywhere, Christmas tonight. Christmas in lands of fir tree and pine. Christmas in lands of palm tree and vine. Christmas where snow peaks stand solemn and white. Christmas where cornfields lie sunny and bright. Everywhere, everywhere, Christmas tonight. Christmas where children are hopeful and gay. Christmas where old men are patient and grey. Christmas where peace, like a dove in its flight, broods over brave men and thicker the fight. Everywhere, everywhere, Christmas tonight. By Philip Brooks. The Shepherd Maiden's Gift. A legend from the East. In the quiet midnight, peace brooded over the fields where the shepherds were watching their flocks. The tinkling of sheep bells, the bleating of lambs, and the barking of watchdogs had gradually ceased. Around a large campfire, several shepherds lay resting, for they had had a long, hard day. Each had beside him a strong shepherd's crook and a stout club ready for use in case any lurking danger threatened the beloved flocks. Not far away from the campfire, a shepherd maiden lay sleeping in the rude shelter of a rocky cave. All day long she had helped her father guard the sheep, and when darkness fell over the fields and hills, she was glad to lie down in a snug bed, made of the fleecy skins of kids and lambs. Suddenly a light filled the cave and wakened the maiden. Thinking it was daybreak, she sprang up, stepped to the rude doorway, and pushed aside the curtain of goatskin. "What has happened?" she whispered. The fields and hills were flooded with light. The group of shepherds were standing close together, gazing intently at the luminous eastern sky. A moment later she saw them fall to their knees in worship. There in the entrance of her rude shelter she, too, knelt and prayed. Clearly she saw the shining angel appear, and in the peaceful stillness of the night she heard these words, "Be not afraid, for behold, I bring good tidings of great joy which shall be to all the people. For there is born to you this day in the city of David a Saviour, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be the sign unto you. You shall find a babe wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger." And suddenly there was with the angel many, many others. Together they lifted up their voices in praise and sang, "Glory to God in the highest, peace on earth, goodwill toward men." When the sweet music died away, the maiden rose to her feet and joined the shepherds. "I saw the angel, Father, and heard the singing," she whispered. "Christ the Lord is born," answered her father. "Let us hasten to Bethlehem and see the heavenly child who fulfills the promise of God," said one of the shepherds. "Shall we leave our flocks?" asked another. But the question was not answered. "Come, let us see what gifts we have to carry to the Christ child," said the shepherd, who first saw the light in the sky. In a few moments these simple-hearted men were ready to start across the fields and over the low hills to Bethlehem. Very humble gifts they had to offer, but their hearts were filled with joy and wonder. Standing near the entrance to the cave, the shepherd maiden could see the outline of the group of men making their way to the city of David. "They are going to see the Christ child," she said to herself, "a babe wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger." How she would love to see the heavenly child. A deep longing to behold the little newborn king seized her. She would follow the shepherds to Bethlehem. One glimpse of the Christ child would fill her heart with joy. Away over the starlit fields and hills she started. Not once did she falter, although the way was long, and some of the hillsides were hard to climb. Finally, she saw the shepherds pass in the gate of the city of Bethlehem. "I came to see the Christ child," she said to a group of people who stood whispering together. They looked at her in astonishment. "I'm following the shepherds," she added. "They've gone to the inn," was the answer. When she reached the inn, she was directed to a cave near, which served as a stable. There, through the entrance, she saw the shepherds lay their humble presents at Mary's feet, and then kneel in solemn adoration. "I've brought nothing to offer," whispered the maiden, looking wistfully into the rude shelter. "I cannot go in without a gift little gift for the Christ child." Tears of disappointment filled her eyes. Slowly she turned to leave the place. But after she had taken a few steps, she stopped and burst into sobs. How could she go away without a glimpse of the heavenly child? Then, as she stood weeping, a marvelous thing happened. An angel appeared beside her and said, "Lo, here at thy feet is a gift for the Christ child." Then she saw growing near her slender stems covered with delicate green leaves and bearing lovely flowers. The maiden did not stop to wonder. Here was a gift fit to offer the little Saviour. With trembling joy she gathered the Christmas roses and stepped lightly into the humble house, where the little babe lay smiling in his mother's arms. In Mary's lap the maiden laid her gift of flowers, and with radiant face she knelt and filled her heart with the glorious vision. Christmas Gifts by Laura E. Richards. "Mother," said Jack, "may I have some money to buy Christmas presents with?" "Dear," said his mother, "I have no money. We are very poor, and I can hardly buy enough food for us all." Jack hung his head. If he had not been 10, the tears would have come to his eyes, but he was 10. "All the other boys give presents," he said. "So shall you," said his mother. "All presents are not bought with money. The best boy that ever lived was as poor as we are, and yet he was always giving." "Who was he?" asked Jack, "and what did he give?" "This is his birthday," said the mother. "He was the good Jesus. He was born in a stable, and he lived in a poor working man's house. He never had a penny of his own, yet he gave 12 good gifts every day. Would you like to try his way?" "Yes," cried Jack. So his mother told him this and that, and soon after Jack started out, dressed in his best suit to give his presents. First he went to Aunt Jane's house. She was old and lame, and she did not like boys. "What do you want?" she asked. "Merry Christmas," said Jack. "May I stay for an hour and help you?" "Humph," said Aunt Jane. "Want to keep you out of mischief, do they? Well, you may bring in some wood." "Shall I split some kindling too?" asked Jack. "If you know how," said Aunt Jane. "I can't have you cutting your foot and messing my clean shed all up." Jack found some fresh pine wood and a bright hatchet, and he split up a great pile of kindling and thought it fun. He stacked it neatly and then brought in a pail of fresh water and filled the kettle. "What else can I do?" he asked. "There's 20 minutes more." "Humph," said Aunt Jane. "You might feed the pig." Jack fed the pig, who thanked him in his own way. "10 minutes more," he said. "What shall I do now?" "Humph," said Aunt Jane. "You may sit down and tell me why you came." "It is a Christmas present," said Jack. "I am giving hours for presents. I had 12, but I gave one to Mother, and another one was gone before I knew I had it. This hour was your present." "Humph," said Aunt Jane. She hobbled to the cupboard and took out a small round pie that smelt very good. "Here," she said. "This is your present, and I thank you for mine. Come again, will you?" "Indeed I will," said Jack, "and thank you for the pie." Next Jack went and read for an hour to old Mr. Green, who was blind. He read a book about the sea, and they both liked it very much, so the hour went quickly. Then it was time to help Mother get dinner, and then time to eat it. That took 2 hours. And Aunt Jane's pie was wonderful. Then Jack took the Smith baby for a ride in his carriage, as Mrs. Smith was ill, and they met his grandfather, who filled Jack's pockets with candy and popcorn, and invited him to a Christmas tree that night. Next, Jack went to see Willie Brown, who had been ill for a long time and could not leave his bed. Willie was very glad to see him. They played a game, and then each told the other a story, and before Jack knew it, the clock struck 6. "Oh," cried Jack, "you've had 2. "2 what?" asked Willie. 2 hours, said Jack, and he told Willie about the presents he was giving. "I'm glad I gave you 2, he said, and I would give you 3, but I must go and help Mother." "Oh dear," said Willie. "I thank you very much, Jack. I have had a perfectly great time, but I have nothing to give you." Jack laughed. "Why, don't you see?" he cried. "You have given me just the same thing. I have had a great time too." "Mother," said Jack as he was going to bed, "I've had a splendid Christmas, but I wish I had something to give you besides the hours." "My darling," said his mother, "you have given me the best gift of all, yourself." A Night with Santa Claus by Anna R. Annan. Not very long ago, and not far from here, lived a little boy named Bobby Morgan. Now I must tell at once how Bobby looked, else how well you know him if you meet him in the street. Blue-eyed was Rob, and fair-haired and pug-nosed. Just the sweetest trifle, his mother said. Well, the day before Christmas, Rob thought it would be a fine thing to run down Main Street and see what was going on. After dinner, his mother put on his fur cap and bright scarf and filled his pockets with crackers and cookies. She told him to be very polite to Santa Claus if he should happen to meet him. Off he trotted, merry as a cricket, with now a skip and now a slide. At every corner he held his breath, half expecting to run into Santa himself. Nothing of the sort happened, however, and he soon found himself before the gay windows of a toy shop. There he saw a spring hobby horse, as large as a Shetland pony, all saddled and bridled too, lacking nothing but a rider. Rob pressed his nose against the glass and tried to imagine the feelings of a boy in that saddle. He must have stood there all day, had not a ragged little fellow pulled his coat. "Wouldn't she just like that pop gun?" he piped. "Catch me looking at pop guns," said Rob shortly. But when he saw how tattered the boy's jacket was, he said more softly, "Perhaps you'd like a cookie." "Try me once," said the shrill little voice. There was a queer lump in Rob's throat as he emptied one pocket of its cakes and thrust them into the dirty, eager hands. Then he marched down the street without so much as glancing at that glorious steed again. Brighter and brighter grew the windows, more and more full of toys. At last our boy stood, with open eyes and mouth, before a great store lighted from top to bottom, for it was growing dark. Rob came near, taking off his cap and saying, "How do you do, sir?" "To whom, you ask?" "Why, to an image of Santa Claus, the size of life, holding a Christmas tree filled with wonderful fruit." Soon a happy thought struck Rob. Surely this must be Santa Claus's own store, where he comes to fill his basket with toys. What if I were to hide there and wait for him? As I said, he was a brave little chap, and he walked straight into the store with the stream of big people. Everybody was busy. No one had the time to look at a mite of a Rob. He tried in vain to find a quiet corner, till he caught sight of some winding stairs that led up to the next story. He crept up, scarcely daring to breathe. What a fairyland! Toys everywhere, oceans of toys. Nothing but toys excepting one happy little boy. Think of 50 great rocking horses in a pile, of whole flocks of woolly sheep and curly dogs with the real bark in them, stacks of drums, regiments of soldiers armed to the teeth, companies of firemen drawing their hose carts, no end of wheelbarrows and velocipedes. Rob screwed his knuckles into his eyes, as a gentle hint that they had better not be playing him any tricks, and then stared with might and main. Suddenly Rob thought he heard a footstep on the stairs. Fearing to be caught, he hid behind a baby wagon. No one came, however, and as he felt rather hungry, he took out the remaining cakes and had a fine supper. Why didn't Santa Claus come? Rob was really getting sleepy. He stretched out his tired legs, and turning one of the woolly sheep on its side, pillowed his curly head upon it. It was so nice to lie there, looking up at the ceiling, hung with toys, and with the faint hum of voices in his ears. The blue eyes grew more and more heavy. Rob was fast asleep. Midnight. The bells rang loud and clear, as if they had great news to tell the world. What noise is that besides the bells? And look, oh look, who is that striding up the room with a great basket on his back? He has stolen his coat from a polar bear, and his cap too, I declare. His boots are of red leather and reach to his knees. His coat and cap are trimmed with wreaths of holly, bright with scarlet berries. Good sir, let us see your face. Why, that is the best part of him. So round and so ruddy, such twinkling eyes and such a merry look about those dimples. But see his long white beard. Can he be old? Oh, very, very old. Over 1900 years. Is that not a long life, little ones? But he has a young heart, this dear old man, and a kind one. Can you guess his name? Hurrah for Santa Claus. Right, the very one. He put his basket down near Robbie, and with his back turned to him, shook the snow from his fur coat. Some of the flakes fell on Rob's face and roused him from his sleep. Opening his eyes, he saw the white figure, but he did not stir nor cry out, lest the vision should vanish. But bless his big heart, he had no idea of vanishing till his night's work was done. He took a large book from his pocket, opened to the first page and looked at it very closely. Tommy Turner was written at the top, and just below was a little map. Yes, there was Tommy's heart mapped out like a country. Part of the land was marked good, part of it bad. Here and there were little flags to point out places where battles had been fought during the year. Some of them were black and some white. Wherever a good feeling had won the fight, there was a white one. Tommy Turner, said Santa Claus aloud. 6 white flags, 3 black ones. That leaves only 3 presents for Tommy, but we must see what can be done for him. So he bustled among the toys and soon had a ball, a horse, and a Noah's Ark tied up in a parcel, which he tossed into the basket. Name after name was read off, some of them belonging to Rob's playmates, and you might be sure that the little boy listened with his heart in his mouth. Robbie Morgan, said Santa Claus. In his excitement, that small lad nearly upset the cart, but Santa did not notice it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Rob's breath came very short, whites. 1, 2, 3 blacks. Now I wonder what that little chap would like. Here's a drum, a box of tools, a knife, a menagerie. If he hadn't run away from school that day and then told a lie about it, I'd give him a rocking horse. Bob groaned in anguish of spirit. But bless him, he's a fine little fellow, and perhaps he will do better next year if I give him the horse. That was too much for our boy. With a hurrah, he jumped up and turned a somersault right at Santa Claus's feet. "Stars and stripes," cried Santa, "what's this?" "Come along, I'll show you the one," cried Rob. Santa Claus allowed himself to be led off to the pile of horses. You may believe that Rob's eyes soon picked out the one with the longest tail and the thickest mane. "Well, he beats all the boys that I ever saw. What shall I do with the little spy?" "Oh dear Santa Claus," cried Robbie, hugging the red boots. "Do just take me along with you. I'll stick tight when you slide down the chimney." "Yes, I guess you will stick tight in the chimney, my little man." "I mean to your back," half-sobbed Rob. Santa Claus can't bear to see little folks in trouble, so he took the boy into his arms and asked where he wanted to go. "To Tommy Turner's. And, oh, you know, that boy in the awful old jacket that likes pop guns," was the breathless reply. Of course he knew him, for he knows every boy and girl in Christendom. So Popgun was added to the medley of toys. Santa Claus then strapped Rob and the basket on his back. He next crept through an open window to a ladder he had placed there, down which he ran as nimbly as a squirrel. The reindeer before the sledge were in a hurry to be off, and tinkled their silver bells right merrily. An instant more and they were snugly tucked up in the white robes. An instant more and they were flying like the wind over the snow. Ah, Tommy's home. Santa Claus sprang out, placed the light ladder against the house, and before Rob could wink a fair wink they were on the roof, making for the chimney. Whether it swallowed him or he swallowed it is still a puzzle to Robbie. Tommy lay sleeping in his little bed and dreaming of a Merry Christmas. His rosy mouth was puckered into something between a whistle and a smile. Rob longed to give him a friendly punch, but Santa Claus shook his head. They filled his stocking and hurried away, for empty little stockings the world over were waiting for their generous hand. On they sped again, never stopping until they came to a wretched little hovel. A black pipe instead of a chimney was sticking through the roof. Rob thought, now I guess he'll have to give it up. But no, he softly pushed the door open and stepped in. On a ragged cot lay the urchin to whom Robbie had given the cookies. One of them, half-eaten, was still clutched in his hand. Santa Claus gently opened the other little fist and put the pop gun into it. "Give him my drum," whispered Rob, and Santa Claus, without a word, placed it near the rumpled head. How swiftly they flew under the bright stars. How sweetly rang the bells. When Santa Claus reined up at Robbie's door, he found his little comrade fast asleep. He laid him tenderly in his crib and drew off a stocking, which he filled with the smaller toys. The rocking horse he placed close to the crib, that Rob might mount him on Christmas morning. A kiss and he was gone. P.S. Rob's mother says it was all a dream, but he declares that it's as true as 4th of July. I prefer to take his word for it. And with that is the end of this year's Christmas episode. As always, you can find the originals for both books on Project Gutenberg at the links that will be in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night, and sweet dreams.